The evening started like any other, a quiet dinner planned between close friends. Sarah's husband, Mark, had invited his best friend Daniel over for a casual meal. It was a routine they had repeated countless times before. Nothing seemed unusual, yet Sarah couldn't shake the strange feeling lingering in the air. Maybe it was the way Daniel's gaze stayed on her a second too long, or the way his laughter felt just a bit too warm when she spoke. She told herself she was imagining things, but deep down, she knew she wasn't. Daniel arrived right on time, just like always. His familiar smile radiated charm as he stepped inside, a bottle of wine in hand. "Evening, Sarah," he said, his deep voice sending a flicker of unease through her. Sarah forced a polite smile. "Evening, Daniel. Dinner's almost ready. Make yourself comfortable." Mark greeted his best friend with an enthusiastic handshake, pulling him into the house like family. The three of them had known each other for years, sharing countless memories. Daniel wasn't just Mark's best friend, he was part of their inner circle. But tonight, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The evening started innocently enough. Conversation flowed, laughter filled the room, and old stories were retold. Daniel was a natural storyteller, weaving tales from their past that had Mark laughing heartily. Sarah joined in, but the unease clung to her, hidden behind a smile. After dinner, Mark stepped away to grab dessert, leaving Sarah and Daniel alone at the table. The moment felt heavier than it should have. Daniel leaned back, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "you look different tonight." Her breath caught. "Different?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. He smiled, his gaze holding something unspoken. "You just seem radiant." Before she could respond, Mark returned, breaking the moment. Daniel straightened immediately, returning to his easygoing posture. But his words hung in the air, sinking into Sarah's mind like stones dropped in water. The dessert was delicious, but Sarah hardly tasted it. Her thoughts kept replaying Daniel's words. "You seem radiant." A simple compliment on the surface, but the way he had said it, with that lingering look, felt like something else entirely. Mark remained blissfully unaware, cracking jokes as he served slices of cheesecake. He had always been easygoing, his presence bringing a sense of warmth and stability. Sarah envied that about him, his ability to enjoy the moment without overthinking it. But she couldn't. As the evening wound down, Daniel sat a little closer than usual. When he reached for his glass, his arm brushed against Sarah's. A simple, accidental touch, yet it sent a ripple through her, an undeniable awareness of his presence. When the night finally ended and Daniel stood by the door to say goodbye, his eyes met hers one last time. It wasn't a casual farewell. It was a silent challenge, an unspoken acknowledgement of the tension between them. "Thanks for dinner," Daniel said, his voice warm. "It was great, as always." Mark clapped him on the back. "You know you're always welcome." Sarah stood beside her husband, her polite smile fixed in place. But inside, her thoughts were anything but calm. As the door closed behind Daniel, the house fell into silence. Mark yawned, stretching as he headed to bed. Sarah lingered in the living room, absently tidying up. The sound of clinking glasses and rustling napkins felt like an excuse to avoid what she was really thinking about. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing back to Daniel. The way he'd spoken to her, the intensity in his gaze. She hated the way it made her feel. Because the truth was, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah tried to push the evening's events out of her mind, but they clung to her thoughts like a stubborn shadow. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the clock. Mark was already asleep, completely unaware of the turmoil swirling inside her. She picked up her phone out of habit, scrolling through notifications that she barely registered. And then, there it was, a message from Daniel. "Thanks for a great evening. Always a pleasure seeing you. You looked amazing tonight." Her breath hitched. She stared at the words, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. 1,000 responses raced through her mind. She could dismiss it as a friendly remark, pretend she hadn't seen it, or, no, she shouldn't even be thinking this way. Sarah placed the phone face down on the table as if that could erase the message from existence. But it was too late. The words had already lodged themselves deep inside her, unraveling something she had kept locked away. Why did this feel different? It wasn't the first time Daniel had complimented her. He had always been charming, always smooth with words. But tonight, it felt personal. She exhaled, shaking her head. It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The next morning, she tried to go about her routine as usual. Coffee, emails, light cleaning, anything to keep her mind occupied. But every time her phone buzzed, her pulse spiked. When she finally glanced at it again, another message from Daniel awaited her. "Hope you're having a great day." A simple text. Innocent enough. But she knew better. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could ignore it. She should ignore it. Instead, she found herself typing, "You too." A safe response. A neutral reply. But even that felt like a step towards something she wasn't ready to admit. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Mark walked into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her waist. His warmth should have reassured her, should have been enough. "What's for dinner, chef?" he teased, kissing her temple. "Pasta," she said with a forced smile. "You okay? You seem quiet today." She hesitated. "Just tired." Mark accepted her answer easily, moving to the living room to watch TV. But Sarah barely registered the sound of the news in the background. Her thoughts were still tangled in a web of what-ifs. Then, the doorbell rang. She frowned, wiping her hands on a towel. They weren't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, her stomach dropped. Daniel stood there, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Daniel?" she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, his usual easy charm in full display. "Just wanted to say thanks for dinner the other night." She hesitated before reaching for the bouquet, her fingers brushing his. The touch lasted a second too long. "You didn't have to do that," she said cautiously, glancing over her shoulder toward the living room. "I know," Daniel replied, his voice dipping lower. "But I wanted to." The air between them thickened. Sarah swallowed hard. "I should put these in water." She stepped back, heart pounding, shutting the door behind her before she could let her thoughts go where they shouldn't. But as she placed the flowers in a vase, her hands trembled. This wasn't just a thank you. She knew it. And for the first time, she wondered if she had the strength to stop what was coming. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flowers. Their vibrant colors contrasted starkly with the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She should have thrown them away, should have pretended Daniel had never shown up at her door. But she didn't. Instead, she sat there, fingers tracing the edge of a petal, lost in thoughts she didn't dare say out loud. The soft murmur of the television drifted in from the living room. Mark was still watching, completely unaware of the thoughts racing through her mind. She could hear him chuckling at something on the screen, so blissfully unbothered by the invisible weight pressing on her chest. Her phone buzzed. She knew who it was before she even looked. Daniel. "Did you like the flowers?" She exhaled slowly, her heart knocking against her ribs. She shouldn't answer. She wouldn't answer. Her fingers moved on their own. "They're beautiful. Thank you." A few seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. "Glad you liked them. I was thinking, we should grab lunch sometime. Just us. Sarah's throat tightened. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, yet somehow anticipating. A dozen alarms blared in her mind, screaming at her to shut this down, to end it here before it spiraled into something dangerous. But instead of saying no, instead of setting a boundary, she found herself staring at the message, her heart thudding. What harm was there in a simple lunch? She hesitated, fingers trembling over the screen. Then she typed, "I'm not sure." Daniel's response came almost instantly. "It's just lunch, Sarah. Nothing more." She bit her lip, her pulse quickening. Just lunch. A harmless meeting between friends. Except it wasn't. Sarah deleted her reply twice before finally settling on, "I'll let you know." She put the phone down, rubbing her temples. Her body felt tense, as if she had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "Everything okay?" Sarah jumped, turning to see Mark standing in the doorway, his brow slightly furrowed. "Yeah," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just lost in thought." Mark nodded, walking over to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. "You sure? You seem a little off." She hated the guilt that clawed at her chest. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just tired." Mark smiled, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Come to bed soon, okay?" "I will." She waited until she heard the bedroom door close before exhaling deeply. Her phone buzzed again. "Take your time. I'll be here." Sarah picked up the phone, staring at the message until her vision blurred. She knew she should ignore it. She knew she should delete it. Instead, she placed the phone face down on the table. Daniel was waiting. And the terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to make him wait for long. The next morning, Sarah moved through the house in a daze. She brewed coffee, folded laundry, answered emails, all the usual motions of a normal day. But nothing felt normal. She told herself that ignoring Daniel's last message meant something. That maybe she was still in control. That maybe this wasn't heading somewhere dangerous. Then her phone buzzed. For a brief second, she hoped it wasn't him. But it was. "Lunch today? No pressure." Her stomach tightened. It was just an invitation. Just a simple question. She could say no. She should say no. But instead of ignoring it, she stared at it. Minutes passed, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, before she could stop herself, she typed, "I don't know if that's a good idea." It was the closest thing to a rejection she could bring herself to send. Daniel replied almost instantly, "I get it, but it's just lunch, Sarah. No expectations, no hidden meanings, just two old friends catching up." Her heart pounded. He was giving her an easy way to say yes. A way to justify meeting him. A way to pretend nothing was wrong. She closed her eyes. It's just lunch. Mark was at work. The house was quiet. No one would ever know. Her fingers moved against her will. "Okay, 1 hour." A message popped up almost immediately. "Perfect. That cafe near the park. See you at noon." Sarah let out a shaky breath and set the phone down, staring at the screen like it had betrayed her. Or maybe she had betrayed herself. The cafe was busy when she arrived, the scent of coffee and fresh bread filling the air. Conversations hummed all around her, but she felt completely disconnected from it all. Then she saw him. Daniel was already there, seated by the window. He looked up, spotted her, and smiled. Her stomach flipped. She shouldn't be here. She should turn around and leave. But she didn't. Instead, she walked over. "Hey," she said, forcing a casual tone. Daniel grinned. "Hey yourself." She sat down across from him, feeling an odd mix of nerves and anticipation. For the first few minutes, the conversation was normal. Safe. "How's work?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "Same old." Daniel replied with a shrug. How about you? Busy. You know how it is. He nodded, then leaned forward slightly. You seem tense. Sarah swallowed. No, I'm fine. Daniel smirked, like he didn't believe her. Like he knew. And that made her nervous. So, he said, lowering his voice. Are we going to pretend? She blinked. Pretend what? That there's nothing here. The air around them suddenly felt too thick. Sarah gripped her coffee cup, fingers tightening around the ceramic. There isn't anything here, she said firmly. This is just lunch, Daniel. Daniel studied her for a moment, then leaned back with a small, knowing smile. If you say so. A beat of silence passed. Sarah looked away, out the window, watching the world move as if nothing had changed. But she had changed, and she wasn't sure she could stop it. Sarah left the cafe feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. She had convinced herself the meeting was innocent, that it was just lunch. But the way Daniel had looked at her, the subtle edge in his words, it was anything but casual. Her phone buzzed before she even reached her car. Daniel, I really enjoyed seeing you today. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She should ignore it. She should end this. But instead, she found herself typing. Sarah. Me too. The moment she sent it, her pulse quickened. It wasn't just the words. It was what they meant. She slid into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. This had to stop. She had been walking a fine line for days now. But what scared her the most was that she wasn't sure she wanted to turn back. As she pulled into the driveway, she sat in the car for a moment, composing herself before going inside. Mark would be home soon. She had to act normal. But the moment she stepped inside, she saw the flowers. The ones Daniel had brought. They were still in the vase on the counter, their bright petals standing out against the kitchen's neutral tones. She should throw them away. She would throw them away. Just not right now. Dinner was quiet that night. Mark was in a good mood, telling her stories about his day. Sarah smiled at the right moments, nodded along, but she wasn't really there. Her mind was somewhere else, with someone else. Sarah? She blinked. What? Mark chuckled. I was saying, maybe we should take a weekend trip soon. Just the two of us. We haven't done that in a while. Her stomach twisted. He was trying. He was a good man, a good husband. And yet... That sounds nice, she lied. Mark reached for her hand across the table. She let him take it, forcing herself to focus on the warmth of his palm, the familiarity of his touch. But all she could think about was Daniel. Her phone buzzed in her lap. She knew who it was. She didn't even have to look. Late that night, when Mark was fast asleep beside her, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark. But it felt like it was glowing, like it was calling to her. She reached for it. There was a message waiting. Daniel, I can't stop thinking about you. Her breath hitched. She should delete it. She should block his number. Instead, she typed, Sarah, I don't know what we're doing. The response came almost immediately. Daniel, neither do I. But I don't want to stop. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the phone like it was the only thing anchoring her. The line between right and wrong was so blurred now, she wasn't sure if it even existed anymore. She knew this was dangerous. She knew this was wrong. But the terrifying part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop either. Sarah woke up exhausted. She had barely slept, her mind tangled in thoughts she couldn't shake. Mark was already in the shower, humming some tune, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing inside her. She rolled onto her side, staring at her phone. Daniel hadn't messaged again after last night, but he didn't have to. His words were already circling in her head like a whisper she couldn't silence. Neither do I. But I don't want to stop. A shiver ran through her. She needed to get a grip. This was still within her control, wasn't it? Later that morning, while folding laundry, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it too quickly, hands trembling. Daniel. Are you free today? She exhaled sharply. This was it. The moment she had to make a choice. She could shut it down, pretend none of this had happened, salvage the life she had built. Or she could let it keep going. She typed and deleted multiple responses. Then, finally, she sent, Sarah, I don't think we should. It took a full minute before his reply came. Daniel. Okay, I understand. A wave of relief crashed over her, but right beneath it was something else. Something that felt like disappointment. She shut her phone off and threw it onto the couch, as if that could bury the temptation for good. The hours passed. She stayed busy, cleaning, making phone calls, cooking dinner. Mark came home, kissed her cheek, and asked about her day. She gave him a vague answer. He didn't question it. For a brief moment, Sarah convinced herself that things were going back to normal. Then, just before bed, her phone buzzed again. She froze. Her heart pounded as she reached for it, already knowing who it was. Daniel. I miss you. Her chest tightened. She should ignore it. She should delete it. But she didn't. Instead, she sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of her own choices pressing down on her. She hadn't lost control yet, but she was so close. Too close. Sarah turned her phone over, face down. Out of sight. Out of mind. At least, that's what she told herself. But the message, I miss you, echoed in her head long after she tried to shut it out. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside her. He had no idea. No idea that she was teetering on the edge of something irreversible. No idea that she was thinking about another man while lying next to him. Her phone buzzed again. She squeezed her eyes shut. She wouldn't look. She couldn't look. Then, slowly, too slowly, she reached for it. Daniel. Tell me I'm wrong. Her breath caught. Tell him he was wrong? Tell him there was nothing between them? She wanted to. She needed to. But when she started typing, her fingers betrayed her. Sarah. I don't know what to say. 3 dots appeared immediately. Daniel. Then don't say anything. Just meet me. Her heart pounded. This wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't a game of innocent texts or stolen glances. This was an invitation, a choice, a decision that once made could never be undone. Sarah's hands trembled as she typed. Sarah. Where? She hit send before she could stop herself. A few seconds passed. Then the reply came. Daniel. You already know where. Sarah sucked in a shaky breath. She did, and she knew that if she went, there was no turning back. Sarah sat frozen, staring at the message. You already know where? Yes. She did. The weight of her phone felt unbearable in her hand. Every rational thought screamed at her to put it down, to walk away, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But something deeper, something darker, was pulling her forward. Her legs felt shaky as she stood. She moved through the house in a trance, barely aware of her own body. Mark was still in the bedroom, fast asleep, his breath slow and even. For a moment, she lingered at the door, gripping the frame. She could go back. She should go back. Instead, she grabbed her coat and slipped out. The air outside was crisp, cutting through the heat burning under her skin. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. Sarah. I'm coming. The moment she sent it, her heart slammed against her ribs. Seconds later, the response came. Daniel. I'm waiting. Her fingers clenched around the wheel as she drove. Each mile felt heavier than the last. Every turn was a question. "Are you really doing this?" And every time the answer was the same. Yes. Yes, she was. When she arrived, he was already there. Daniel stood near the entrance, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. But when he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Something dangerous. She stepped out of the car, feeling like she was watching herself from a distance. She should say something. She should stop this. But when he took a step closer, she didn't move away. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low. No, she wasn't. But she nodded anyway. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath. Then, without another word, he reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. And just like that, Sarah crossed the line.